morning. Great to see you. Excited to have you here.
Thank you.
So you were just earlier this month, you got your vice chairmanship was effective.
Yes.
And that is capping quite a great career at Mastercard, even until then. I want to kind of go back to the beginning of your career, because there's a really fun fact about Anne, at least I find it really interesting, is that you started your career with British Gas, and you were actually the first woman in Britain approved to work on an offshore oil rig.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Ago.
Yeah, but I think it's important to touch on that a little bit. Can you take us back there? I want to know how you got into that line of work and sort of what it was like to be the first in that sense.
Well, I actually joined as a research scientist with British Gas, and I was the only woman up in the Newcastle research station. And after I'd been working a few years, I realized that the cutting edge of the business was really this offshore thing. So I thought, I really want to do that. So I looked up in the telephone directory the guy who ran offshore engineering. His name was Bruce Goodwin, he's South African. And I just rang him up and I said, you don't know me, but I'm the only woman engineer up in Newcastle, and I'd love to work on the rigs. And he said, interesting, hop on the train to London, come down and talk to me about it. So that's how I got the job, basically. There was a guy who was running offshore engineering that I started to work for who disappeared within 2 months because he was a contractor for PA, and I actually stepped into his role when he moved. So it was quite a fast-moving part of the industry, and I enjoyed it very much. I mean, obviously there weren't any facilities out there like ladies' loos or stuff like that, so, you know, slightly inconvenient. And
did you work to change that, or did you kind of just
No, not when you're the only woman.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems, you know, there's not that much space on the rig, so to ask for a loo for you doesn't seem right. There's no bolts on the door, so you just have to put your feet up. You know. But you make do, because it's just such an interesting life, and there's huge camaraderie. And the guys that I worked with, remember this is back in the 80s, they were all doing open university degrees in English literature and history and so on. So they were good fun to talk to.
Right. I'm curious how that sort of shaped your outlook on your career since then. I mean, you talked about it being sort of a big, you know, camaraderie and teamwork. So how does that play into what you've done since then?
Well, I think when I joined Citibank in the investment bank, I found less of that in the trading area. It was kind of a bit more my space, your space, you know, this kind of thing, less teamwork. And they used to always be sending us investment bankers on teamwork training courses. Well, as an engineer, I kind of went, how can you possibly build something if you don't work as a team? And I've always said, you know, who would want to be walking across a bridge built by some investment bankers? Right. Scary. But what I've found in my subsequent career, especially now here at Mastercard, we have so many partners and we're touching so many people in different parts of the world. You really have to operate like a global team. Otherwise, you just can't be successful in business. And that's what I love about the environment I'm in right now.
Right. We are going to get to questions, but so start thinking of them. But first I want to talk about, obviously, your current role. Part of it is about sort of evaluating the future of payments and the fintech space in general. I'm curious, when you, from your position, look out onto that landscape, sort of what you see as on the horizon. You know, what are the hot things that you're sort of keeping your eye on?
Well, first of all, I think in America particularly, conversational commerce is taking off. People are talking to their devices and actually buying things using speech. It's less prevalent here in Europe, though about 1 in 5 people have already done that here in Europe.
Has anyone done that? Does
anybody talk to Alexa or
to buy
Siri
or
stuff? Device, yeah. So that's starting to take off. So one of the things that we have to think about is how do we make that really safe and secure without introducing a lot of friction into that. So that's a nice design challenge to have. The other thing that's very hot is, of course, artificial intelligence.
Right.
And we're using that in all sorts of ways. But in our industry, it's, fraud prevention is a big thing. So, for example, the way that you use a telephone is different from the way that I use a telephone, the way that we actually key. And we have artificial intelligence that can detect your behavior. So if I left my phone there and you picked it up and tried to make a payment, it would know it's not me. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of cool. But one of the things that I was just talking about recently was I was in China, and you know, it was clear to me artificial intelligence is taking off there in a big way. Sure. And obviously it is in Silicon Valley as well. And I wonder whether we're going to perpetuate the East-West divide by, you know, by having different philosophical views as we teach the computers how to think. Mm. It's kind of an interesting thing to think of. The other thing is people have asked me, why is it important for more women to go into STEM and be involved in these industries? And I said, well, first of all, we're half the human race. And if there aren't enough of us engaged, and I don't actually even just mean women, I mean a diverse group of people teaching the computers how to think, then we're going to get computers who think like some bro culture on the West Coast, or, you know, some completely different philosophy in Asia. So that's not so great, actually.
Right. What do you think is the key to getting more women into this field? I mean, you've probably been involved in a lot of different initiatives. What have you seen that sort of worked?
Well, I think you've got to grab girls young and tell them it's fun. And so we've been rolling out our Girls for Tech program. We've already engaged 50,000 girls around about 12 years old. Around the world, and brought them into Mastercard and said, hey, the tech industry's cool, here's all the sort of fun things that we do, and it's actually quite a glamorous job as you move up the ranks. And now we're rolling that out to about 200,000 girls around the world. I do think it's just getting them at the right age, and maybe you should start even earlier than that.
Right. So, I mean, all the technology you're talking about seems really useful for me and you. We have our mobile phones, we have our bank accounts. So how do you make sure that this technology doesn't skip over those or doesn't leave out those who aren't yet at that sort of advanced stage in terms of their own personal technology? So, you know, I do say that there's no point having the internet of everything if you don't have the internet of everyone. So this whole area of inclusion is really important. But it's interesting you're talking about technology skipping because, you know, many people who are excluded from the financial system in Africa have got mobile phones. Mm-hmm. And it may actually be a feature phone, but that doesn't matter. They've got some way of communicating. And that's why we've started our labs in Africa, based in Kenya, actually with African people building solutions for Africans, living on sort of a couple of dollars a day. And one of the things that, you know, we've thought about is you're never going to persuade anybody who earns a couple of dollars a day to put that money in the telephone. So you've got to find a funding source. But what we've found is around the world, governments are helping mainly with things like farming subsidies and so on. And many women are farmers in different parts of the world. But if it's manually delivered, then all of the middlemen in between are taking their cut before it arrives with the person who deserves the money. We're trying to work with governments that get the money direct from the government to the farmer. That's one example. Or direct from the government to the parent who's getting child benefit, or to the person who's getting a pension. And these kinds of things are starting to bring people into the financial system. And with the projects we've had around the world, we think we've added something like 300 million more people. We have a commitment to add 500 million by 2020. Okay. Do we have any questions for Anne in the audience? Not yet. I think you mentioned recently about blockchain and Mastercard potentially being able to put its network on the blockchain. Can you explain to us why that's something that interests the company, or what benefits you see from doing that?
Well, obviously, we're a technology company. We've got one of the biggest networks in the world. And so we've got to look at the latest technology and say, what does that bring? and can we use it? We decided, because we built our network from scratch, it's completely proprietary, that it made sense for us to build a proprietary blockchain that could run our whole network, and that's what we've done. And it's permissioned blockchain at the moment. And the thing is, what we wanted to do then is find use cases where blockchain would be helpful. We think that the early use cases could be things like authenticity. You know, is a drug the real drug? Is the Rolex watch the real Rolex watch? This kind of thing. And blockchain is actually quite good at that sort of authenticity. So we're out, and we're also working. We can make payments with blockchain today, but like anything, the whole ecosystem has to be developed. So we're working with some of the biggest banks in the world to actually see how we move payments cross-border on blockchain. For us, though, it's a technology, and that's the way that we view it. It's not the silver bullet for everything, but you can see that it would create a lot of security because of the way that it works. You can lose big portions of the blockchain and still retain the underlying information, which is pretty important. And if you can get it to the speed you need, that's the thing that we're really interested in today.
So if I'm a Mastercard card holder, how is that going to benefit me?
Well, right now, it doesn't benefit you because we haven't got any live examples that are sitting behind the cards. But, you know, the network sits behind the cards. If part of the network moves to the cloud or part of the network runs on blockchain, it will be invisible to you, but it will have features and functions in it that will make it operate in a more streamlined way, or, you know, just a way that the whole market's developing.
Right. I think we have a question right here.
And thank you very much, Herta van Stiegel here. And for purposes of this question, I'm asking it as the former chairman of CHAPS Co. So my question is related to the future of cash and cryptocurrencies. Can you talk a bit about that from your perspective? We hear all sorts of prognoses about cash disappearing, both in emerging markets and in the developed world. And also we see the rise of a lot of cryptocurrencies, maybe 1,500 by now, if not more. Where are we going with this? And how do you see the future from your perspective?
Right. So cash isn't disappearing as fast as perhaps we'd like to think it is. Still, 85% of the world's transactions, retail transactions, are still cash. And that's because as you travel around the world to other countries, you see a vast amount of cash. Germany being one of the most prevalent cash economies in Europe. Here in Britain, we've got less than 50% cash. And as you get up into the Nordic regions, it kind of disappears to almost nothing. And that's because the Scandinavians decided that they were trying to eliminate cash, and there are good reasons for doing that, some of which are economic, because our studies show, not our studies, but independent studies show, that it costs a country between 0.5% and 1.5% of the GDP of the country just to count it, reconcile it, move it around, stick it into machines, armored cars, yada, yada. So a lot of stuff. Now you go to a country where you've got massive tax evasion or a black economy, and that number kind of goes through the roof. So governments are looking at that and saying they would like to reduce cash in their economy. I think, though, for the individual, I truly believe we have to give people the opportunity to have many ways to pay and to be able to live their lives. And so, you know, we need to have a balance with that. The cryptocurrencies, you're quite right. There's hundreds of cryptocurrencies today, Bitcoin being the most famous cryptocurrency. Personally, from a green perspective, the amount of energy used to actually get the reconciliation working and to get the mining done on that currency is off the charts, and I think that is going to be something which will affect the growth in future years. And then also we've seen people use it for bad reasons because it's untraceable until they actually convert it to other kinds of currency. But central banks are now looking a lot at should they have a digital currency for their country. And we're helping them. We're looking at white papers. We're writing white papers to do studies on it and say, what are the benefits of this and how would it work and so on. So we keep a very open mind on cryptocurrencies right now, just as I wouldn't say we're keeping an open mind on blockchain. I would say that we're very much into the development of blockchain. We'll wait and see how the cryptocurrency world goes.
So you joined Citi in the late 80s, and 19 days before
Black Monday
market crash.
Yeah, my timing's impeccable.
Yeah. And
never follow me into an industry.
And then years later, you led the European team that managed the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers.
Yes.
I'm curious, as you look at the economy, the world economy now, are you if you see there's a risk for another crisis of that sort?
You know, I think these things are cyclical, and I think that we will have another crisis at some point in time. Because let's face it, the way that investment banks work is by arbitraging and so on. I would say that the world's changed because there's so much more transactions routing through clearinghouses, which obviously have margins. So the regulators have done things that protect us. Mm-hmm. The regulators have done other things that I don't think do protect us, in the sense that different regulators want the same information packaged up different ways, and it's costing banks and people a lot of money and time to do this, not necessarily making us safer. So I think that we will have peaks and troughs and future crises. But I think that we'll come through them. I'm an eternal optimist, and there'll always be people that love managing in those situations. I'm certainly one of them. I love fixing things. So next time there's one, I'll be getting my spanner out, and I'll be there.
Okay. Well, perfect. Thank you so much, Anne. Really appreciate hearing from you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.